Welcome to Extra Takes, hosted by Northland Church Senior Pastor, Dr. Joshua Laxton. Join us each week as Pastor Josh reveals the rest of the story behind his sermons. We'll discuss how those who follow Christ can live out a biblical vision for the church in our world today.
Well, hello, Northland family and friends. Welcome to another episode of Extra Takes. I'm your co-host, PJ, along with MS, Matt Shiles.
How you doing?
There you go. MS just doesn't...
MWS.
MWS.
Yeah.
MWS.
Remember my middle name? We've met
Brad.
this before. No, it starts with a W.
MWS? Oh, William. William.
Yeah.
William. Yeah, I thought, well, Mathew, Bill. Hey, because, William, nickname is Bill.
That's my dad's name.
Oh, so that's why you...
Billy.
Is that why you're...
He's William Saxon Shiles Jr.
Oh,
How about that?
That's very prestigious. So...
But you've met him.
I have.
Yes, very regal name.
Okay, yeah, it definitely sounds very regal.
It does,
So,
yeah. So that's where it came from.
Well, here we are.
We're here.
We're here. Cheers.
Where's your Topo Chico?
It's in the refrigerator.
But you're not off of it. You're still drinking.
Oh no, I'm not. I'm not off of it.
okay.
I'm on a budget.
I'm still waiting for that sponsorship money from Topo
No,
Chico.
they need to. I got
One
my
day
coffee.
they're
I got
gonna
my
call.
coffee and water.
There you go. It's one of those days.
I need more coffee.
So let's do this. We're in week 2 of the Believe series.
Believe.
You're pretty excited about this series.
I am. I don't know if it's landing the way I want to, but I'm excited.
Why is that?
I don't know. I have no idea.
You're just not sure
yeah.
if it's landing.
Well,
Yeah.
because we were moving somewhere.
Yeah, you're moving
Yeah.
for sure.
I'm trying to tell you all about Believe.
Yeah.
So.
Will you get a better sense after week 4?
Well, yeah, because week 4 the message will be different in the fact I'll kind of in some sense preach half of it and then share the vision the second half.
Right. Yeah.
Because I'll pull it all together.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But this coming week will be really important because you have to sustain Believe. And
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, and a lot of people don't sustain Believe.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to sustain anything.
They get stuck.
Will you talk about your endurance training at all? Will that?
No, I've done that through Iron Faith. I don't think that, because I was doing some study this morning, and I don't think I'll do that.
Okay.
One of the things that I did write, and so this is interesting. I put, let me see if I can find it. Yeah, so so I'm going to talk about how Israel, and I'm going to start off with they're leaving. They listened, and it says they listened and obeyed what the Lord commanded.
Wow.
And they left.
Yeah.
Okay, so they believe.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but then I'm also going to share Numbers 14, where basically half of them aren't going to make it. And then I'm going to spend the whole message unpacking the sabotages and the saboteurs that kept them from believing. And then I'm going to share what is it going to take, because God all along gave them what they needed for them to sustain it. But the older generation just didn't. But
Wow.
here's some kind of statement I'm going to make. They live enslaved, although they are free. They never make the switch in their heart. So they leave physically without leaving spiritually.
Ooh.
And today, people leave spiritually without leaving physically because they say, I believe, but live contrary to Jesus. They truly are a Christian atheist, and this is what we learned in Laodicea. So with Israel, they left physically because they got out of Egypt, but they still were enslaved spiritually. And so what happens with us, though, we, in some sense, spiritually believe, oh yeah, I prayed a prayer, Jesus saved me from my sins. But physically, it has not been demonstrated in our life. And so we live in a suspension of unbelief, which is where people call that Christian atheism.
Yeah.
So we say, but we live a different thing. And so that's how, so I actually think there are a lot of Christians and a lot of churches, they are living in a suspension of unbelief, even though, quote unquote, spiritually they believe. But that's where I'm trying to get to the aspect and drill down on it, that if you believe, you're doing something.
Yeah, that's the obedience part.
That's the obedience. So that's what I really tried to stress this past week.
Because then this is going to build on that next week.
Yeah. Because did you know it only took them 2 years to basically suspend their belief? So from the time they left to Numbers 14 was just a 2-year period.
I mean, that's a shocking number, but I can believe it.
And so they will spend 38 years in just suspension. They will spend 38 years in stuckness. They will spend 38 years in their wilderness, never fully tapping into God's redemption, never fully tapping into God's shalom, His peace, and never fully tapping into God's purpose. They won't be in Egypt. And now is it going to be a sobering message? It'd be kind of like what I think this week, because it's setting, because again, we're charting, because this is, again, you even see these things in the New Testament. Again, that's why I said Laodicea.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I did the Galatians, and we've taken 3 days, Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night, and just unpacked Galatians, because Paul's like, you were running well, what happened? And then he calls them like, you foolish Galatians. Like, what have you done? Yeah. Like, here's the gospel. Yeah. Here's what the gospel has called you to. Here's what you're called to do with now the faith that you have in Jesus. Yeah. And you have now been deceived. And it's kind of like, you no longer believe what I told you. So it happens.
So here's a question I wasn't planning on asking. You're spending 3 days in Galatians digging into it. Do you think that study will affect your sermon prep over these next couple of weeks? You think that'll play into it any?
No. Sure. All of it goes together. But it's funny, because when I'm sitting there in the kind of the Bible study that we've had, I have an hour and a half. And now, again, I'm not preaching, or I'm not actually teaching the whole time. Yeah. We're reading a passage. Yeah. We're pausing. Yeah. I'm telling them, hey, I want you to circle. I want you to highlight. I want you to reflect. I want you to write what's the Spirit telling you. Yeah. And then I kind of unpack it. But then I get to use that time, though, of connecting all these dots too, that I normally don't even get. So the Bible is one book, and so what I like to, and so will it impact and come into the message in terms of me drawing out of Galatians? No, not really. But there's so much there, though, from a New Testament perspective of what we're experiencing in Egypt.
Interesting.
Yeah,
of course.
So
that's what we've so appreciated, your ability to connect into a whole story. So I can imagine as you're studying Galatians, maybe then you're looking back on how it actually connects to.
Well, it connects. When you look at Galatians, not that this past message this weekend was on Galatians, but Paul in the book of Galatians, or in his letter to the churches of Galatia, he's going to address the law. The law's given during the wilderness. Yeah. It's given early on. It's given early on at Mount Sinai. So they're going to have the law, but that law was supposed to, kind of give them the framework and the boundaries of how they lived in the land. Okay, and Paul's going to tell the church the role of the law. But then he also goes all the way back to Abraham, that predates the law, and talks about how one is saved. And he says Abraham gives us the pattern of salvation, that Abraham believed, and I was like, there's belief again, because belief is faith, faith is belief. Yeah. It's the trust, confidence, belief in the object that you believe is going to satisfy your needs.
Those 5 elements of faith chart.
Yeah. So Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Yeah. So because of his faith, he was counted in right standing with God. Yeah. That's what it takes. But do we know what Abraham did? He moved. Now, that doesn't mean he was perfect. Oh, by no means was he perfect.
Sure, yeah.
But he moved. He listened and heeded because he believed. And not only that, we also see in Galatians 3, and this is where it all connects, is that in Genesis 12:3, Paul's going to reach back and go, well, God gave and he says this, the gospel, the good news to Abraham, that through him all of the nations would be blessed.
Yeah.
And so that's where, like, if you really want to get into where is the Great Commission first stated, it actually is in Genesis 12, verse 3. Mm-hmm. That is the Great Commission, that through the seed of Abraham, all of the nations of the earth, every tribe, every nation, every tongue, every people group would be blessed through his descendant, the seed. That's what Paul's talking about. So anyway, so it all connects.
Well, and I think that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I think it's helpful anytime we spend so much time in the Old Testament, which I think sometimes we can just default to the New Testament in our reading, in our study, even in our sermons. So we spend so much time in the Old Testament. I think it's helpful for us to remember those connections. So let's dig into the outline for this week and see where that gets us. So this was week 2, Exodus 3 through 12, January 25th and 26th. The main point was all about listening and obedience and heeding. So you said it 3 different ways. To believe in the Lord for peace, redemption, and purpose will require you to heed his call. Second is to believe will require you to heed. And finally, if you don't heed, you don't believe. You spent some time giving us kind of a framework of both the forces working against you to believe and also the way God works for you to believe. And then we looked at Moses, we looked at Israel, and we looked at Pharaoh. So we saw Moses was in need of ultimate purpose. We saw Israel was in need of redemption, and then Pharaoh, Egypt, they were in need of peace. So let's start with that first one, that framework. Forces working against you to believe. Those are objections, obstructions, and obstacles. And then God's work for you to believe, that's God will seek you out, God gives you signs, and then he will give you support. So talk about that framework and how you use that throughout this week.
The passage that that comes to my mind is in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. He talks about that we're new creatures in Christ, right?
Well, I thought we were in the Old Testament.
Well, yeah, but this is where I'm going to show you how even now what we see in the Old Testament it connects. So, because that's what I love.
That's what you do.
I love to do.
So 2 Corinthians 5.
And so he talks about this idea of new, kind of new creation, that we are new creatures in Christ. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old is gone, the new is here. Okay, so that's 2 Corinthians 5, kind of verse 17. Well, verses earlier in chapter 4, here's what we read. So, and even if our gospel is veiled, meaning hidden, it is hidden to those who are perishing. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. And so Paul's even saying this, is that there are forces, and the prince of the power of the air, and he uses that terminology to describe Satan in another letter of his, I believe it's in Ephesians. But we see that there are forces working against our enslavement to keep us enslaved, to keep us blinded, to keep us veiled from being able to see the glory, the promise of Jesus to redeem us, to give us purpose, to give us hope, to give us true peace and shalom. But what you see that is, you see that here as well. And again, it's a pattern. Like there is a pattern that we see in Scripture in so many different ways. And And that's why I just wanted to kind of, launch there when you see the forces.
Yeah.
But God's work for you to believe is that he's going to seek you out. The disciples were taught by Jesus, you didn't seek me, I sought you. Now, again, that doesn't mean that maybe you didn't cry out, that you weren't looking. But just as Israel, they cried out, but it wasn't like they were seeking God. And it's not like Moses. And this is what's fascinating, is that Moses doesn't seem to be, in some sense, quote unquote, seeking God while he's as a shepherd in Midian. It's like he's stuck. I mean, but God sought him.
That middle part of his life, right?
Yeah, it's the middle part of his life.
Yeah.
So God's going to seek you, then God's going to give you signs that actually show his presence, his power, in not only your life, but in the world. And then he's going to give you support. Now, again, I did not, I only have 50 minutes. There's so much. I wish I had, I really do. But I think even if I had 2 hours, I would be saying I didn't get to it all.
You think so?
I probably would. Maybe, I don't know, because there's so much.
You put a lot in here.
I did.
This is like, this is how most of your sermons are. Like, it's a whole sermon series in just one sermon.
Yeah, and yeah, you could bust it down more, but then it's like then it's like slow motion.
Right.
And
I know you've explained that in the past, where like you don't want to extend it too much out, because then it's hard to gain momentum in terms of making those connections. And so you give us a lot to allow us to see a little bit of a bigger picture to make those connections, even knowing that like not everyone's going to be able to grasp all of it.
Well, not everybody's going to grab, but again, you look at 3 different people here, and you have an audience of 2,500, 3,000 that's going to listen. That's listening or going to listen that week to the message, and they may not see themselves in Moses, but maybe they see themselves in Israel.
Yeah.
But if I just busted it up and I'm just going to do week 1 Moses, week 2, and it's kind of like, well, I
don't relate to that as well.
Yeah. And some but even then, I still feel like I'm taking snapshots though and building somewhere. So it just depends on the series and how you're trying to articulate it.
Yeah.
But if you look at, but that's why I love doing the podcast, and that's why I probably will get more into doing Bible studies outside of the weekend.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, I probably, and it's not that I've never wanted to, but here's the thing though, if I say yes to that, I've got to say no to something else. So
every yes is a no.
Yeah. So, but God will seek you out. He's going to seek you, and then that's where the sign comes. What is this? It's Jesus. Now, does God still work miracles? He does.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to discount that. He still, but if we're sitting there waiting on another sign,
we've missed the point.
We've missed the point.
Yeah.
We've missed the point. And then that's why we can talk about it maybe here in a second. But that's why I also wanted to add another sign, is that the church is supposed to be a sign of His glory divine. Like we're supposed to be that sign. So he wants to give people signs that says that will say, I'm here. I do love you. I am your Redeemer. I do want to give you purpose. I am shalom. I am peace. I will give you, like, He's going to give you signs that He is the one true God, that is the answer to all of your human needs, your big needs. And again, if He's the solution to your bigger needs, I guess what that means, He's the solution to your smaller needs.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but then God will provide support. Well, for Moses, it was Aaron. And then it was the entire community, Israel, that they were supposed to support one another. And then when you look at the New Testament, the support is supposed to be the church. That we're supposed to be the encouragement, the exhortation for one another. We're supposed to cry when one cries. We're supposed to celebrate when why? Because it now is this communal family, this communal support that we now have as we represent God's kingdom and God's people in the world. So God's work for you to believe, because you were never meant to do it alone. And that's where I feel like He met Moses in the middle and compromised. But I mentioned it at the 9. I didn't mention it anywhere else. But you actually see Moses even grow in confidence. I mean, Aaron speaking first.
Oh, I definitely.
But then later on, Moses is the one taking over. I'll speak.
Yeah, I think that was really obvious when you pointed out his lack of confidence.
Yeah.
And then in subsequent, especially when you saw that it wasn't going great with Aaron. Then as Moses steps up, it seems like he's able to build that confidence.
And the next time he's the one speaking.
Yeah, interesting. So let's look at Moses. He was in need of ultimate purpose. You gave those 5 objections. First one is, why me? Who am I? Second one, who do I tell them sent me? Third one is, what if they don't believe me or listen to me? Fourth is, I cannot speak well. And fifth is, please send someone else. Which of those 5 do you most relate to?
Who that I relate to?
Yeah.
I
love it. You weren't expecting that question.
Well, I would probably say number 2, number 3. I mean,
Who do I tell them sent me, or what if they don't believe or listen?
And I think because I'll give you for instance about number 3. Okay, what if they don't believe or listen to me? Particularly in this day and age. Okay, so I've pastored multiple churches. And every church has been on decline. Every church was in need of renewal, restoration, or revitalization is a word that is really floated around in the church world.
Yeah.
And so part of the discussion is, okay, well, we want you to lead us forward. Okay. But then this pattern is hard for them to believe. They've been stuck, and it could be they've been stuck for years, maybe a decade or so, and so. But I had to learn how to lead better.
Sure.
But nevertheless, I kept on coming up to this kind of brick wall. Well, we don't want to do it that way. No, this is our church. Why are you changing on? I mean, it's like okay, you said you wanted help.
Yeah.
You said you wanted change. You said you wanted to grow again. Okay, but are you it's like God, and then it's like I get this kind of PTSD, and really even for my wife is like, these churches say they want something. These churches say they need something. These churches say, oh yes, we believe that God called you, but then you keep on hitting this brick wall.
Yeah.
And so it's like, will these people really listen to me? See, I really do identify with Moses because I've tried. Here's the thing. I have tried turning around churches, and I feel like I have failed miserably. And that's where I feel like I've learned the good, the bad, and the ugly of church, of which I'm a part, and I've learned the good, the bad, and the ugly of me, of just leadership and some, but youthfulness. That again, it wasn't intentional. It was just like, I'm 24 years old. What do you expect? I'm 30 years old. What do you expect? Like I'm not seasoned. Right. And even now I feel seasoned, but I'm not perfect. So it's kind of like I feel Moses' pain. I tried. Now, here's the thing. I have to figure out, okay, were some of those where was I trying in my own power? Yeah. Because, with Moses, he was. Sure. So I could see his very first instinct and objection is, why me? I've tried, I've failed.
Sure.
And there is a degree of that. Well, I've tried, and I failed. Like, are you really? And it's like, Northland? So that's where I'm like, no, when I came into Northland, you're talking about magnifying the downturn. When you go from 10,000 to 650, something's gone. Something's gone wrong. Sure, COVID played a little bit of a role in that, but still, when you bleed,
and you're like, really, Lord?
When you believe 9,000 people, plus, you're like, me, and then you're like, well, what if they don't believe? What if they don't listen? And then that's where I really feel like what God's doing with the staff and the hand and the water is He's like, listen, I've already told you I would be with you, so that's going to be a big difference. But let me tell you, let me express and demonstrate my power.
Yeah.
So it's one thing for me to tell you that I'm going to be with you, but let me tell you who I am. That will be, because I already told you that I am who I am. So so I'm going to be with you. Here's who I am.
Yeah.
I'm revealing to you I am who I am.
Yeah.
So I'm Yahweh.
Yeah.
And again, God has not revealed. Now, here's the thing, give a little tidbit here. So anytime in the Old Testament you see the word Lord capitalized, that's God's covenant name. Okay. Now, who's writing? Now, but here's the thing though. Who's writing the first 5 books of the Bible?
Moses.
He's the one who got the revelation. Yahweh. See, God did not reveal himself to Abraham as Yahweh. Now, he revealed himself to Abraham as Jehovah Jireh, the God who will provide. You remember where he did that?
No.
With Isaac.
Oh.
Okay. I believe he also reveals himself as I want to say El Shaddai, but I could be wrong.
But he did not reveal himself as Yahweh to Abraham.
No. This is the first time he reveals himself. So as Yahweh. And it's Moses who's going to write Lord. So yes, anywhere you see capital, that is Yahweh, but he had not revealed himself until then, which is why Moses could then say, Lord, Lord, Lord. Wow. You know, that he is the covenantal God. He is the God of yesterday, today, and forever. He is the God with no beginning, no end. He is the self-sufficient God. All right, so, but then God begins to express and to flex his power, his power to turn the material into kind of this natural, to return it back. He has the power to curse and to cure. He's exposing. I have the power over life and death. Like he's showing Moses. And then at that point, Moses is like, there might be something here, but he's like, one more, I can't speak. And then then God's like, look at what I just did. Who do you think made your mouth? But going back to your question, I really do feel like that because I've again, just because of the churches that God has had me pastor, will they listen? And part of even will they listen, I was always young. And yeah, I mean, I pastor a lot of people who are older than me, and I believe that there is a mutual now respect. But when I was 24, when I was 30, there really was very little honor or respect. And so, what does this guy know? Well, you hired me. So I've had to deal with that and wrestle with that through a lot of my just hurts, heartaches, that I've gone through with the church. But those would be the two. Yeah,
thanks for sharing that. Especially when you're looking at the larger skepticism of trust in clergy in America.
Oh gosh,
30-something percent.
We like Congress. Ooh, not that bad yet. I hope we don't get that bad.
Yeah, not that bad, right? So let's look at Israel. So that was Moses. Now Israel, they were in need of redemption. And you gave this principle that led into this, maybe the most fired up you were. You got fired up a couple different times. But you said redemption tends to lead to deeper, darker experiences before you experience the freedom, release, and deliverance redemption brings. And then you talked about, about prosperity preachers.
Yeah.
Talk about that moment. Well, why'd you share that? Why'd you get so fired up?
I don't know. It wasn't in my notes.
Oh, it wasn't?
Well, you get my notes. It wasn't in my notes.
Well,
you didn't read it, I guess.
I didn't. Yeah, I don't always comb through it ahead of time.
Okay, gotcha.
Like that.
Yeah. I mean, it hits me in the moment because we do have a lot of brothers and sisters from South America. That is a large growth area of prosperity, preachers and ministries. We still have that here, but also is to combat this idea that nothing bad is going to happen to me, that Jesus is in some sense going to, fully relieve all of my situations and circumstances that are not good or that are bad. And it did get darker before it got brighter. And I want people to realize that is that the redemption that he brings is, yes, one of these days. And for Israel, now here's the thing, and he wanted to lead them to the promised land. Okay, so a land flowing with milk and honey, where as long as they would listen and obey and heed him, they would enjoy abundance and peace. They would enjoy this freedom and redemption. They would live out. They were supposed to live out their purposes. So the promised land was their brighter day.
Yeah.
But they had to go through the grip of the Egyptians, and they had to go through the wilderness wanderings to get to their brighter day. Okay? So when you're looking at it from a New Testament perspective, okay? So our sin, when we are born in our sin and our trespasses, we are, as human beings, we are enslaved. Okay, so there's a grip. I just read that 2 Corinthians chapter 4, okay? So Satan wants to keep us blind. He wants to keep us enslaved to sin, the world, the flesh, because that's the realm he occupies dominance and authority over right now.
Yeah.
Okay, but for those who have broken free, they've been redeemed. Okay, that doesn't mean everything gets better instantaneously, because we are still in the wilderness wanderings. We are still in. Here's another way of putting it.
Yeah.
So in John 1. When John is penning his gospel and he talks about in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, he's equating Jesus to obviously not only God and the Word, but he's the dawn of new creation because he's using Genesis language.
Yeah.
And then he even uses light, that now the light has dawned, and now the light is the light of men. So now he's come to shine light in us. So all of that to say is that, and I've said this, over the last month or so, because I think it's a really big point that I'm really trying to stress, where people understand where we are in the world and in redemptive history. So what Jesus does, he is raised from the dead on what? Sunday.
Yeah.
That's that is the first day of the week. What he's signifying, this is the dawn of new creation. This is the inauguration of God's kingdom here on earth. It's not complete yet. It's not complete yet.
Right.
So in this dawn of new creation, when it's not complete, because we still live in a sinful, broken, fragmented world where the kingdom of man still reigns, we're having to go through the wilderness through the kingdom of man as we go towards the promised land. And the promised land for us is twofold. On one hand, it is Jesus himself, which is why the kingdom is now here spiritually, but not yet complete physically, in the sense of what we're going to see in Revelation 21, where it comes down. So there's this spiritual reality where Jesus is our promised land, where peace and abundance and goodness and wellness is in Jesus, where our purpose is in Jesus, where our redemption obviously is in Jesus. But it will not be fully realized in its complete, consummated reality until Jesus comes back. So all of that being said is that as we live out this redeemed life in the midst of a broken world, as we're on our way to the promised land, it actually might get grim from a circumstantial, situational. We might lose our job. We might lose a lot of our 401k. We might get cancer. Just fill in the blank. We might, and we experience these dark moments. And if we're not careful, these prosperity teachers and preachers will create an obstruction that, you don't have the right faith, because if you had the right faith, then you wouldn't go through that dark moment. And that is a lie from the pit of hell. That is venom straight from Satan himself to obstruct us to truly understand redemption in the here and now and where redemption is going. So that's where, because I want people to realize that, man, there's still thorn and thistles in this world. But that's where Jesus, though, he is the solution, which is why Paul in Philippians chapter 4, where he talks about and present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will do what? Will guard your heart. So even though there will be moments where you're going through something that you've even prayed for God to take, but God will give you this shalom that surpasses surpasses your even understanding of how you can even have this calmness and wellness even in the midst of darkness.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I think just that the framework of understanding that we are still in the wilderness just helps to push back against that idea that everything's going to be normal and hunky-dory. We know that the wilderness is obviously a time of trial. So.
And so there's two particular patterns in the Old Testament that we see that apply to us today.
Okay.
Wilderness.
Okay.
You know the second one?
Can't think of it. No.
Exile.
Oh, yeah.
So because
Those aren't the same?
Well, no. Well, yes, no, but there's two patterns.
Okay.
There is the wilderness pattern where you've been freed and you're marching towards the promised land.
Got it.
Okay. Well, so now, but they both apply. But when I say they're in some sense two different elements of Israel's history that do apply to us
Exile,
spiritually.
being kicked out.
So exile, you were in the promised land, but you did not listen and heed. Because you actually had the heart of Pharaoh. That's what they're exposing. They had a stubborn, hard heart. And as a result of their inability to listen and heed, God kicked them out of the promised land. So he exiled them. But in exile, what did God promise? God promised redemption. God promised restoration.
Yeah.
God promised peace.
Way back, yeah.
God promised a restoration of purpose where all the nations might know. And so now we're living not only in exile because this world is not our home,
right.
We're also living in the wilderness.
Interesting.
So both of them definitely apply, but they were two sides of Israel's history that actually apply to the church, and the New Testament points to both of them. And I'm going to give you a lot of the points this coming week of how what you see in redemption actually is seen in the New Testament.
Awesome. All right, so let's look at Pharaoh.
Okay.
Because we're going to run out of time.
So I talked about, I just mentioned Pharaoh and the stubborn, hard heart.
Yeah. So you had talked about, so for Pharaoh in Egypt, you said their obstacle is their current broken, flawed, and deceptive worldview.
That's huge. I mean, that's significant.
So there was a couple quotes that you shared with Pharaoh that were really hard-hitting. One, you said, all the world can do is counterfeit God. They can't counteract God.
Yeah.
And then the second was that idea of what the effects of Egypt have been after this event, right? So them as a superpower.
Yeah.
Never recovering. You said, Egypt would never recover as the superpower. God would ruin them. They would never experience the peace and prosperity they enjoyed for centuries. Why? Because Yahweh came to town and they refused to believe. So he was going to make them believe. Man, that is strong. When you said that, I was like, whoo, that made me scared for us today.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh boy.
Well, for centuries, maybe even a millennia.
They're one of the most fascinating histories to look at because of their prominence and man.
But that's where I would encourage anybody, if you don't believe what I said, just go look at history books. They will never come on the scene again. Sure, that doesn't mean that they won't have some kind of element of power. They were the superpower. Yeah, nobody wanted to fight them.
They're not the Russia, China, U.S., Yeah.
No, but they used to be. And then when you look at who does come on the scene, you have, particularly once Israel got there, Israel was never necessarily a superpower, but you didn't want to mess with them early on. God. Yeah, early on, they're like, no, we heard about your God and what they did to the Egyptians. Well, we don't want to. We're good. Okay. So, but then as Israel begins to struggle, God begins to raise up superpowers. So then you have the Assyrians.
Yeah.
Then you have the Babylonians. Yeah. Then you have the Medes and the Persians. Then you have the Greeks. Then you have the Romans. Yeah. And then when you look at the pride of the Romans and how they persecuted the church, the Roman Empire came to ruins. Okay. So. What you have is that you have the rise and you actually have the fall of these superpowers, and really some of those some of the falls of the superpowers happened because of the way they treated God's people. So that's why there is, I would say there is a prophetic warning to America and Americans that want to persecute Christians. Now, again, I'm not saying that we ought to become a Christian, when I say Christian nation in the sense of force everybody to become a Christian. I don't believe, now, do I believe that we ought to have morals and values that are Judeo-Christian? I actually believe that. I believe that's a healthy country.
Yeah.
But that's where, but the growing secularism in our nation that is trying to counteract God and actually, in some sense, live out the Nietzschean idea God is dead. Mm-hmm. I'm not warning you. God's warning you. But then I would also, in that section though, or in that thought, I would also warn the Christians: don't you become an obstruction to the move and the redemption and the salvation that God wants to bring to these secularists. That you need to watch how you behave. You need to watch what you say. You need to watch how you interact with the pharaohs and the Egyptians of this world who are enslaved to a worldview. So don't become an obstruction of the kingdom. Become a sign of the kingdom. So that's my prophetic warning to the church. So I got two prophetic warnings. I got a prophetic warning to the secularists and those Americans that want to, in some sense, live out the Nietzschean idea God is dead, and we got to get God removed from everything, that God doesn't exist. We can do everything on our own, and we're going to persecute and oppose any Christian that even wants to even declare God or have any kind of moral Judeo-Christian value. Like there is a prophetic warning to you. You can just look at history, and obviously I would encourage you to look at the Bible, but you can actually just look at the history books, okay? But then the prophetic warning to the church is you better be careful of how you treat the pharaohs and the Egyptians of this world, because God would have you treat them the way Jesus had treated us when we were at enmity and enslaved in our worldview. And so God wants us to be a sign of His glory divine, not an obstruction for people to see His glory divine.
Well said.
So
it's a great place to end.
That's a great place to end.
So
okay.
Good.
So, Northland family and friends, hey, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Extra Takes. We love you. Can't wait to see you and worship King Jesus with you this weekend as we continue week 3 of Believe. So how do you sustain believe?
You're a little excited.
Yeah, I wrote the main point this morning.
Oh, you did?
You
want to tell us?
No.
But you got to reward the people that watched all the way to the end. I
got to reward the people who watched. I wrote it down. I wrote it down in my notebook. So I'll give you a glimpse. I don't know how it says. So, for believe to succeed, you've got to endure the sabotages and saboteurs. So for believe to succeed, you have to endure the sabotages and the saboteurs.
Okay.
So it'd be something like that.
Interesting.
So and the reason why this is so funny because I did not. We're keep going. So this is the addendum. This is the extra of
the PS.
I didn't set up this series to do need precedes believe or to believe you need to heed. I didn't plan that. And so I'm like, well, now I got to go with it. So actually, now I'm not forcing it, but to believe, for believe to succeed.
Yeah.
You've got to endure sabotages and saboteurs.
All right.
So,
looking forward to it.
Love you, Northland. Blessings.
Thanks for listening to Extra Takes. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you won't miss a single episode.